Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste, the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. And I have a special guest with me. I'm going to have her introduce herself to you all.
Hey everyone, my name is Meklit Hadero. Wait, did you mean like the real, like the whole, like the full introduction?
No,
And
it
I,
is. I'll tell the
I
audience
mean,
why
I
I'm
could do that
laughing.
too. Why are you
No,
laughing?
because when you said your last name, so basically right before the show, I was like, I mean, her name is easy to say, but it's a new name for me. So I was like
Yes.
saying it. And then when you said your last name, I was like, yeah, there would have been no way. I would have had to have a little more time to practice because I never want to mess up anybody's name. Yes. Thank you for being here. Tell people where you're from, though.
Yes, I am from Ethiopia. I was born in
Woo.
Addis Ababa and grew up all over the states. Yes.
Oh wow, that's so awesome. And she has an amazing podcast. Tell people about your podcast, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show.
Yes, my podcast is called Movement with Meklit Hadero. It's a podcast that uplifts the songs and stories of immigrant, migrant, and refugee musicians. The amazing music coming out of these communities that is genre bending, cross cultural, and I like to think of it like the music of the neighborhood is global,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
we look at the intersection of music and migration, and we think that we need human-centered, intimate stories of migration to really be able to even begin to think about what that issue is. And people who have experienced migration should be at the center of those stories, and that's what we're doing.
I love that. And you speaking of music, I'm gonna ask you a story. I don't know if it was you or your guest. You talk about New York, how there was. What's your
Mm.
favorite? Was it you or your guest? I don't
I mean,
remember.
I think it was kind of both of us.
Oh, you would say
Yes.
rap, like, and it was like that was the thing, right? And I love how you have different musician types on, and
Yes.
there and I just want to say, when growing up I struggled a lot, and I remember music being the one thing that I would listen to at night. I would listen to like because I didn't we had I'm 41, so it wasn't like Apple Podcasts, like it was the radio.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
at night
mhm.
it would be opera, like the different like or during the day. So I listened to all types of music because that's what I had
Yes.
available. But I remember it doing something for me, not realizing it's like a healing modality, being able to
Yes.
listen to music. So I'm excited to hear about how you ventured upon this. But before I do that, let us know a little bit about your upbringing so we can know who you are and
Yes.
understand how you got into the industry you got into.
Thank you, Celeste. So I was born in Ethiopia and I left when I was about 2 years old. We went to Germany and then we came to the US. And I'm actually gonna give you the whole list of places that I lived because when you hear it all together, it's kind of it kind of makes a certain impact. So here I go. I'm gonna take a deep breath. Addis Ababa, Dusseldorf, Washington, D.C., Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa, Brooklyn, Jacksonville, Gainesville, Miami, London for just a few months, but it was pretty formative. New Haven, Seattle, and San Francisco. So those are all the places that I lived in my life.
Wait, wait,
Wait,
wait,
wait,
wait,
wait,
wait.
wait, 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 wait. Yeah,
Wait,
yeah, yeah.
listen, because I knew I was interviewing you, so I'm going to tell you about my little migration story from Boston to Georgia. For anybody that don't know, I went from the East Coast, cold weather, to down south. Um, and I think about like migration, like immigrants and people that I know that come here from other countries. And I
Yes.
remember as a teenager going from Boston, Massachusetts to Georgia. Culture, like, it's different. There's more people speak to you, and I remember having a culture shock in the same I'm living in the same country, having a culture shock. And it made me think about people who come here from another country. And I'm
Mhm,
listening to like
mhm.
where you been. You had a lot of
A
times
lot
where
of
you had to
shocks.
readjust. I know, I had my one little shock. Let me leave my one little shock out this conversation because you got way more of me than I have. That's a lot. Oh my
Well,
goodness.
everybody's stories, I mean,
I know, I know.
are so it's so,
Yes.
and I will say, even aside from the big story of like Ethiopia and all those other places, like when we moved from Brooklyn, where I spent my elementary school years, to Florida, like that was also a shock. I was
Yeah.
like, where are all I mean, we moved to, like, Jacksonville and then Gainesville, Florida, and this was the '90s, so it was like, "Wait a minute, what where are all the Asian people?" I mean, now there's, like, it's, like,
Yeah,
much
yeah,
more things are much more diverse now, but there, it was, like, a very black and white dynamic, and
yeah.
so, just there I also experienced those like, within America shocks, like you're
Oh,
talking about
yeah, yeah,
also,
you did.
but I think I the way that I think about it, like, the first few moves were us being refugees and trying to find our place and trying to make home, and then my parents were moving for jobs, and then after that, I was moving trying to find, like, the place that was home for me. I think that, in a lot of ways, as a person who was a refugee and became a refugee so young in my life, I, like, would often like, I also became so used to moving, so used to starting over, that it became almost over time a strength of mine. Like, I can walk into a room and not know anybody, and I can be like, "Okay." Like, I've got you assess the room, you figure it out, you start to know how to, like, really listen to people's stories and, build friendships quickly, and that has been a skill that's actually supported me throughout my entire life, even though it came from trauma. I know that we all have that, right? Like, we all have those ways in which, like, we build skills and then we say, "Okay, well, this came from trauma. Now how do I hold on to the good stuff and, like, process and really look at the hard parts?" And just acknowledge our own life history, but also recognize that some of the things that came out of it were gifts too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people I've looked at my life the way you have, like, what's the beauty in the struggle? I don't think people recognize the power in that or even how to do it. I think, a lot of times I find that people get stuck, right?
Mm.
And like, "Oh, I had to move. I don't know anybody. I gotta make new friends." But the way you're spinning it is a strength that a lot of people like, I try to get people to gravitate towards, which is, do you think you've always had that kind of strength to be able to do that and
Mm.
recognize that? Because that's not typical for people here.
Yeah, I don't know, I think I had really great role models, my parents,
Mhm.
first and foremost, like, they remade their lives, like, I was a kid, kids are flexible and,
Yeah.
they're, I mean, they shouldn't have to be like, right? Like, we don't want our kids to go through
Right.
the challenges that they often have to just because of life circumstances and, structural oppressions,
Mhm.
um, but my parents were really brave,
Mhm.
and they were able to go into I saw them over and over again going into so many situations, be able to be themselves, and in many cases, I saw them struggling to, like, make their way. Like, when we first came to the US, like, my mom had at the time, like, a very thick accent, and the
Mhm.
ways that, like, that was a detriment to her and
I know.
didn't, like, show like, people didn't see her strength and intelligence because all they could hear was the accent, and
Mhm.
I'm like, "Hey, she's an educated woman, she's, like, she was the only female graduate of her medical school in her year. She's like a genius
Dang.
person, And
Wow.
so I could see her bravery and see how she was just like, okay, like, this is hard and I'm going to show up as myself anyway. And so I think I had a lot of really strong examples of how to, like, recognize your power even in places where things were extremely challenging.
Wow, I don't get to hear that, being able to, show up as you are, even, in black African Americans in this country, we've assimilated over the years, um, with white culture because of just trying to fit in and stuff. How like when you say that, like in the moments, like even in your teenage years, did you recognize that you were allowed to be authentic? It sounds like watching your mom and the way you were raised, it was instilled in you to just continue to be your authentic self despite.
Well, I mean, there's there's
Oh,
always
yeah.
there's always complexity, right? I mean, my
Okay.
parents were very much like, "Be academic, study
Yep.
really hard, become a scientist, become a
Mhm.
doctor, become a" uh, become a lawyer, become an engineer. Um, and so like and there's a side to me that's very academic, and I loved school, and like I was good at school. And so in that way I could really do that.
Mhm.
Um, it definitely took me a long time to be able to claim being a musician and an artist. Like that
Oh,
that
okay.
part that part of
Okay,
things,
yeah.
was more
Well,
like
that's
I
like yeah, because the parents don't understand. I get it, like, especially because it's like we want you to be able to survive and make
That's right.
money. And,
Yes.
creative people, even in this country, there's not really a place. I feel like it's people are seeing it now differently, right? Because we only look at
Mhm.
intellectual, gifts, as the route to success and not like interpersonal skills, creative skills. And so I understand where that came, why that wasn't really a thing for your parents.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they're like,
Yeah.
"We worked so hard to bring you to this country and you wanna be a singer? What?" Like, no. So so I had to, grow up and find my own path
Yeah.
to that myself, and they've become my biggest supporters, even though, like,
Yay.
at the beginning, it was a journey to get there, but we all grew together. Mm.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And speaking of like you being a musician, what did that journey look like for you? Given your Ethiopian parents definitely wanted you to be a doc. My
Yeah.
hesitation,
Mhm.
I deal with a lot of like people from other countries, and I recognize like how that how culturally like the creative side is not really embraced.
Yeah, I so when I was growing up, I kinda saw 2 paths to music. I saw a path that was very academic, where nobody seemed to be having any fun.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, well, that's not really for me because, singing is my greatest joy," And then there was another side of it where it seemed more like a cult of fame, where it was just all about people wanting to like, me, me, ego, ego, ego." And I was like, "That's not really what I wanna do either." And then, I mean, the full real journey, which this is a, podcast hosted by a therapist, so I'm just gonna tell the full truth, is that
I
I
somehow figure out a way to pull it out. People be like, "I
yeah.
wasn't expecting to say all that."
Yeah, well, that's one of your gifts. I had a brain tumor in college, and
Oh.
it wasn't cancer, it was a pituitary tumor, which is the gland at the very base of your brain that produces all most of your hormones. And, 19 years old, facing your mortality, they took the tumor out through my nose. And I was like, well, I guess this could all end at any moment. So I think I'm gonna do what I wanna do.
Wow.
And then, even on top of that, I at the time I was taking a class in college called Current Issues in Biological Sciences, and because I still liked biology, I just didn't wanna be a doctor. But in the class, the whole thing that all you did was you chose a topic to study, and you studied it for the whole semester, and you wrote a very in-depth, like 50-page paper. And I was like, well, I have this tumor, so I'm going to learn as much as I can about it. And I learned about it. I was like, oh, sometimes people with this thing have this adjacent issue called acromegaly, where you have too much growth hormone. And I was like, oh, look at all these symptoms. I have all of these. Well, wait, they didn't test me for this. Do I have this? I better call my endocrinologist and tell them that they need to test me for this. So I did, and they were like, "Oh, your numbers are off the charts. You actually do have this, and we don't even know what your numbers would have been before your brain surgery, but this could cause serious heart problems, and we're so glad you caught this." I was like, "Okay."
What?
So I diagnosed
That's
myself,
wild.
and
This is
then I
before
was
TikTok.
this is before t yes, this is before I know, right? Like, think about it. And
Oh my
then
gosh.
then I was like, "Okay, well, maybe I have good instincts. Maybe I'm maybe I should listen to the voice inside of me."
Stop
Um,
lying. That is so dope.
so So then I moved to then when after I graduated, I moved to San Francisco and I was like, okay, now I'm going to take it seriously. And I met this whole community of artists who was really socially engaged, thinking about the way that arts and culture could help us engage in the world around us in meaningful ways and be meaningful to the communities around us. I was like, this is it. This is how I can do it. And then from there, every step I took towards music, music took 10 steps towards me.
Wow, that's incredible. I have chills. I always tell people when people on their deathbeds, like as they get older, and they've interviewed people, there's a study that's been going on about like happiness and for like
Mhm.
75 years, Harvard's doing it or 80 years. But that one of the things they wish is that they didn't care about what people did. ca- They didn't care. They wish they didn't care about how people felt about them and they did what they wanted
Mm.
to do.
Mm.
And it's unfortunate, like at such a young age, you were faced with that. And, hope, my goal in this is for people not to have to experience like being on their deathbed in order to like live their life.
That's right.
But I understand how that experience just fast forwarded your ability to embrace the thing that's within you. Like I always say, like we all have different gifts that
That's
we're
right.
given. But unfortunately, some people's gifts ends up going with them to the graveyard because they never actually allow it to flow. So thank you for sharing that. That's incredible.
I love the way you said it. You said that experience fast forwarded because that's what it felt like. It felt like maybe I
Mhm.
would have come to it anyway, but it
You
would have
would have,
taken
yeah.
10 more years or
I know.
15 more years,
I know.
and it did the fast forwarding is like exactly the right language for what
Mm.
that experience did for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I felt. It was like, whoa. And then that inner voice, again, we all have it. And there's so many things that we allow to distract us from actually listening to ourselves and hearing what we're supposed to be doing, which is why I always talk about stillness and being mindful. But also, movement is important, right? I love the way you frame your podcast. And I want to get into how you decided to create it. First, tell people about the podcast.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and then I want to hear about like how, as you're telling about it, like where did the mindset come from as you were
Mhm.
creating it?
Yeah. Well, the podcast is part music discovery show
Mhm.
and part like,
Oh, I
social
see.
investigation. So one of the things we want people
That's
to
dope.
understand is that like there is incredible music coming out of immigrant communities and it's not about genre. Like it's in hip hop, it's in electronic music, it's in traditional music, it's in jazz. It's literally like immigrants are you know, cultural innovators who in many ways are like dealing with these very large scale social issues in their music and doing it in incredibly progressive ways and ways that really recognize also the power of what American music is and where American music comes from, which is Black people and Black
Mhm.
Americans. And so um you know, it's one part music discovery show. Every episode features a different musician whose music and life journey is grounded in an experience of migration. And then at the same time, we're looking at the way like large scale issues play out at the level of intimate human scale life. So, for example, we want to talk about these big issues, but we think the best way to talk about a big social issue is by really like the intimate journeys that accompany it. And just to give you an example, like we were in the United Arab Emirates, we did a whole live show and series of podcasts with musicians living in Abu Dhabi. And now this is a place where 90% of the people come from somewhere else. Everything,
Yeah,
the doctors,
yeah.
the janitors, the business people, everybody comes from somewhere else, 90% of the folks. And so migration is very normal there, but you have to have a job to have a visa. So we told a story of a Filipino musician who was like the innovator of the Filipino electronic experimental scene, which is a thing in the United Arab Emirates. I bet you didn't know. And
No.
and we told a story of him and his brother, two brothers sharing one guitar, and what happens when they make different decisions for their lives and they find that they have to be separated you know, after their whole life being their closest friends, allies to each other, because these, like immigration policies make both of them make different decisions for their lives. But we're not going to talk directly about the policy, because if you talk about policy, you're kind of using a certain part of your mind. We want to talk about two brothers, the music that they made together and the songs that they made. And then you not only get like a window into the kind of environment, the country, the place, the people, but you also get an intimate look at, you know, at like everybody has, not everybody has a brother, but everybody has a family member that they're close to, and what would
Mhm.
happen if you had to separate because of these like big kind
Oh,
of,
yeah.
forces that are pushing against you. So we like to look at these large scale forces at the level of an intimate human life. And then we are also a music discovery show. So we're both of those
Yeah,
things.
that's dope. Wow, that's dope. And because I grew up in America, was born and raised here, and then you know, the first like real like relationship I had with somebody, it was my husband that was not from here, but his parents left him at um I think for like a few years to come here. And,
Mhm.
he told me the story, and then, I hear it now, from other people. And in my heart as a mom, I think about like how hard that must have been
Oh,
to
yes.
do that. One of the things that you want to make sure, and I love that, is that you're sharing stories from a strength base, because a lot of time, like I was
Good.
like, oh my god, that must be so hard. And um I think that a lot of times people will just get stuck in the pain and look at the pain in it. And it sounds like, and based off of like hearing the episodes and listening to you talk, you really want to show the creativity and the power. And I think that's powerful, but tell people about that, why that's so important for
Yes.
you to do that.
Thank you for bringing that out. It is really important for us, and it's one of the kind of core principles of the way that we do storytelling. And we like to say, and have heard many others say, that, our ancestors didn't just give us trauma, they gave us gifts, and we don't, while trauma and pain might be a part of these stories, because inevitably, when people go somewhere else, they are leaving something behind or people behind. But at the same time, we like to focus on like making sure that we have space for the epiphany, the ancestral wisdom, the creativity, the innovation, the cultural power, the strength, the beauty. And we use music to talk about the things that are hard to talk about. That's why sometimes it's hard to talk about music, because you're using music to talk about the things that are hard to talk about. So it's hard to talk about the things that anyway, it gets very circular very quickly. But in an audio environment, you can press play. You can hear how it sounds in a song. You can hear the emotional swells and crescendos, and the places where maybe a rhythm becomes spare, and you start to feel the sense of, that two hearts pulling against each other. But then you dance to it too. You can dance to it. You can bop your head to it. You can literally celebrate with your body. Your body can be engaged, um there's this there's this wild there's many studies, in fact, about how music affects us at the level of the body. There's something called entrainment, where if you're hearing a rhythm, your brain waves will start to synchronize with it. And isn't that interesting that it's so not only are you being, led into the stories of these immigrant musicians, but you're literally synchronizing with the rhythms of the places that they come from as you listen to it. And it becomes a way of entering their whole world, not just like the smallness of a specific sentence or a bio, but actually the feeling that their music or the places that they call home bring out in themselves, in their communities, and in the listeners.
Wow, yeah, it sounds so poetic, and you're right. I think about yeah, I mean, you have a way with words, like, you just I don't know. Um, but I think about, with the brainwaves, I just think about, like, I could hear a song from 20 years ago, and I feel like I'm back there.
Right?
Like, I never did any studies or, like, learned about it, how it works, but I'm not surprised, about that study around how it synchronizes, because it takes you to, and now I understand why music was so healing, because when you listen to the words, there's a lot of truth, a lot of ways that I related to some of the words and the things that I've
Yes.
heard. So it sounds like your goal is to change dialogue around the way we look at migration, right? Um,
Yes.
and that is that because have you had bad experiences around the way, I think about when you talk about your mom's accent, and I think about how people are dismissed. Um,
Yes.
I'm American, so I could say it. Americans could be a little ignorant around people that are other than them. And when I used to work in the emergency rooms, I remember people we would be waiting for like um a interpreter, and then like while we're waiting they start talking, I'm talking to them, and I'm like, your English is fine, I understand you, but I think they're so used to being dismissed
Yes.
because we don't want to like listen. As soon as we hear the accent, it's kind of like there's this stigma that goes up, which is unfortunate. But it sounds like based off of your experiences, you want people to like see like no, like this is who we are. Like there's strength, there's creativity, there's power. Is that accurate?
It's definitely part of it, and, accents are my like, I love people with that like, people
Mhm.
ESL people are my people, like, I love
Oh,
hearing the music of the accent, like, you can hear the
wow.
music of a home language by hearing an accent
Wow.
in English, like, I just love it. But yes, definitely I had a lot of challenges, people, growing up, people making fun of my name, people saying, "Oh, Ethiopia, why aren't you starving?"
Damn.
All this stuff or not having any references of the like power of my own culture. And definitely like you asked me a question, why did I start this podcast? And I started it because, I like to tell bigger stories than I can do alone. I
Mm,
think that when people come together to tell stories together, they can shift narratives, they can impact policy,
mhm,
they can heal each other.
mhm.
The we have live shows where we bring together immigrant musicians from every place that we travel to, and we bring out the stories of local communities and local musicians. It's like a mix of a concert and storytelling experience. We do community-based gatherings where we play music for each other. We bring together immigrant musicians. We bring together policy and advocacy organizations who are working in these fields with musicians. It's
That's
like we have so much, um, room for new narratives of migration,
mhm,
and but the framework has to be set, and, like,
mhm,
that's something that we can do through this podcast, through this storytelling project,
mhm.
um, and at the same time, like, we haven't done this yet, but my plan, we're gonna curate, concert series and festival stages and all of this stuff because there's
Oh, I see it. I can
yes,
totally see it, like,
yes,
and you're speaking it into existence. I love
y
that, like, I think that's important, and it's not by accident that these spaces are turning like healing spaces, right? In
absolutely.
America, very individualistic. And I started this podcast because I used to come on live and talk about mental health. People say, "Oh, it's easy because you're a therapist." I said, therapy and psychiatry aren't the only modalities to healing. In fact, community is actually so important, and a lot of us were stripped of that. And
That's right.
being able to bring that back and with the storytelling, with the music and the movement, like all of that stuff is so powerful. And unfortunately it's not mainstreamed, right? Like people, that's not, when we're talking about, oh, what are you doing to heal, it's like medicine, talking to someone, but it's not like meditation, yoga, community. Like community is so huge, and it sounds like you're doing really powerful work through like the brand that you're creating, which is sounds so amazing.
Well, these modalities, these are our
Yep.
ancestral
Yep. Speak on it.
heritages. You know, we
Yep.
have this because we have always had it.
Yep.
And it's like sometimes innovation is simply about remembering. You
Mm,
know? It is simply about remembering, and it's strength that is a part of all of our stories, when we look back at what we have been given and what we have
yeah.
been able to, um, hold on to and retain and can return to at any moment.
Yeah, and when say that, tell people what you mean by that, because it's important. You decided to listen to your inner voice, and returning to, like, what your ancestors created. Like, storytelling was huge for ancestors,
That's right.
community,
That's
right?
right.
And so when you say return back, because I always say, if you're still breathing, there's room for change. And how would you encourage people to do that in their personal lives, as they're listening to us talk about this?
You know, the first thing I think of is like, put down the phone.
You would say it again for the people in the back. I'm telling you, I know it's a little. You'd be like, I've had people take breaks and they'll talk about the power and the experiences that they're able to have from that break. But speak on
Listen,
why it's important.
listen, I mean, I'm talking to myself too because I'm caught up in 2023, just like all of us. This is like we are in this place in this time. Our phones are hyper addictive. But I would say that, like, the power is just in it, there is a huge power in gathering, in being together with
Yeah.
people, in reminding each other of um the kind of like things happen in person that cannot happen virtually. And that's
Mhm.
is interesting. Like, just to give you one example again
Mhm.
from music, like when people sing together, when a group of people sing together, now that can be two people together in a living room. It doesn't have to be like, or
Mhm.
it can be like, 50,000 people at a Beyonce concert. Like it could be
Mhm.
either one,
Mhm.
But what
Mhm.
happens is if we sing together, our heartbeats sync up with each other,
Mhm.
our breath syncs up with each other.
Wow.
And so our physiologies our physiology, which is our body systems,
Yeah.
have a pathway to align with one another. Have you ever wondered why you feel so connected to somebody after you sing with them? Your bodies literally aligned with each other. And remember what I said earlier about entrainment. That's also your brain waves. Your brain, your heart, your lungs start to align with each other. Now, what does this give us a feeling of?
Wow.
Pleasure. It gives
Yeah.
us it releases dopamine
Yep.
so that our brains actually experience a sense of pleasure, gratification. But, I can explain it in these science terms, but that's when we feel it, we don't feel it in science terms. We just feel good.
We
We
just feel
feel
good.
connected. We
Mhm.
feel alive. We feel hopeful. We feel
Mhm.
possibility. And that's available to all of us. And it doesn't have to just be singing together. It can be anything together with people. Like all of this acts on our bodies to align ourselves with other people and to create that environment where healing is potential, you know? So
Wow.
then you think about all that, and then you talk about your life history together, and then you talk about what your
Yeah.
hopes and dreams are, and then you talk about, okay, being an accountability partner with somebody, like, oh, I want to
Uh-huh.
do this, I want to do this. Let's help each other to do it. Like our potential literally can multiply from those experiences.
Wow. And I grew up in church, and I remember Sundays feeling so powerful. And I part of it, I was like, I tell people, like, part of why you feel good, you're around people experience the same thing. And even the singing, I think about that, and how there was this different feeling on Sunday than it was Monday through Saturday,
Mhm.
that a lot of people experienced. They allowed slaves to have that Sunday, which probably was a huge factor in them getting through the week, having that kind of dopamine shot of the gatherings that they were able to do. So that's interesting to hear, the science behind it, because that part I knew there was something there, but I never like knew there was there's studies that talk about how that works, you know?
Listen, they haven't even begun to understand what drumming does to like, cause then you add the drum. Like, have you been to Congo Square? Oh my god, in New Orleans, that place is so powerful. Like, the
You
drumming that
can
would
feel
happen
it.
there, oh,
Yeah.
it's just palpable, like, it's like
Yeah.
electric, like that those
Yeah.
drum like, you still feel those drums, you know?
Wow, wow. That's it. So it makes sense now why, because when I was reading your bio and stuff, and I was just thinking about how much I love music, like I go to sleep to it. My kids love music, and like I can feel it. Like there's certain songs if I'm having a hard time that I'll put on, and it just immediately like shifts the atmosphere for me. Where I'm
Mhm.
able to like I feel it in my spirit, where I'll make sure I play it. And it's interesting to hear about the science. I think that is I'm sure a lot of people listening is gonna be like, oh, that makes sense. So I appreciate you sharing that piece.
Right on, right on. Yeah.
If
But I just wanna say one last thing,
yeah.
which is like, we know in our hearts that music does that, and it
Oh
should be
yeah, yeah,
enough.
yeah.
Our heart knowledge and wisdom should be enough. Like, it's nice to know the science, but actually the science is only to support what we ourselves understand to be in our
Hmm.
own lives, which is that, like, how many people, like you were saying, as teenagers,
Hmm.
l like, felt like they were themselves when they were listening to music. Like,
Hmm.
music's like, how if you say to somebody, "Did music save your life when you were 15 years old?"
Hmm.
Like, how many people will say
Oh
yes?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
How
yeah,
many? Like, we know
yeah.
this in our hearts, and the science is nice,
It's
but
nice, but we
but our
don't need
hearts
it to
are what is
know.
important, you
Yeah.
know?
And also, me emphasizing it too is because I want people to look at how they can put that in their toolbox of like
There you
when they're
go,
having,
yes.
because people it may happen by accident where they just listen to and they don't realize, oh, I feel different. So I want people to think about like what they feel like and what helps them get through because there's so many different things that we have access to. I know socioeconomics like your status can be a barrier, right? And
That's right.
I never like I wanted this podcast because I wanted people to look at different ways that they can work on themselves when they're struggling, as opposed
Yes,
to like, oh, I don't have insurance or I can't find a therapist or whatever. Like I don't want you to think your healing is attached to not being able to find somebody that you can work with. Like I want you to start where you are and use what you have. And
I
when we think
love
about
that.
music, it's really a powerful thing that can really help you through moments. It's not going to change your socioeconomic status in the moment, but it can give you a little strength to go an inch further, right? Because it's like we're
That's
really
right.
just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And when you live in a country that blames you or makes you feel like you're not working hard enough or doing things right, not realizing there are systems in place that keeps us, especially Black people,
That's right.
down. For me, it's important for us to understand like there's things out there that we can do to get through some hard moments.
Ooh, I love everything you just said. That was
Yes.
so powerful, and I
Yeah.
I just wanna thank you for this work that you're doing because everything you said was so important that we all have access to that regardless, and that
Mhm.
it's about going 1 inch further, one step,
Mhm.
one step, one step, one step.
Yeah,
Yeah,
putting
thank
one
you.
foot in front of the other, because and I think about migration and just like I've heard a lot of stories and just listening to people just share. I and even now, like we have a lot of people coming over here, and I know that it's challenging. And so my goal is like this podcast is to help people have hope. And so
Mm,
like I appreciate your candidness about your story and just
thank
like what
you.
you're doing as well. Because like the way I talk and do things like this podcast isn't for everybody. But then I think about like a podcast like yours where it's like shorter, there's music, like something like that can help people too, right? Like just because I'm a therapist, I'm just helping sharing a story. So I'm grateful to what you're doing because you're helping push the needle forward and giving people hope. And even like some people that have migrated here who may have only been stuck in their pain, they may be like, you know what? That is true. Like I was able to do that. And one of the guys on the podcast was like, people like he didn't they have not having money is like something you tried to hide, and there was a place you ate where people
Yes.
you didn't have money. He said, and that song actually blew up, and he was like, I'm just gonna be honest, like I eat here too. And I just think like that narrative of like let's stop faking the funk, let's be real with each other because we're all going through something. And so much, like you said, put down the phones because all we're seeing on social media is highlighted reels. And so you think you're just on the struggle bus alone, and imagine that the community that's built through what you're doing and how you're sharing stories from so many different places. It's truly amazing that you found that niche, right, of thing there. So I think that's pretty
Thank you,
amazing. So thank
Celeste.
you for what you're doing.
Thank you, thank you.
Tell people how they can find you, how they can find what you're doing. And also it's gonna be in the
Yes.
show notes, but I want you to like mention it yourself.
The podcast is called Movement with Meklit Hadero. Meklit is spelled Meklit. You can find me on Instagram at Meklit Music, and you can find more about movement stories you can find more about movement at movementstories.com.
And I'm assuming if there's an artist that's listening and they can go to your website to kind of try to get on your podcast to
Oh
share.
yeah, we have an inquiry form. I do
Okay.
read them all personally. If there are any immigrant musicians out there who want to be considered for our podcast, you can write me on Instagram. You can write me through our inquiry form on the website. I will see all of that. We also have a lot of community building opportunities. So definitely we're open to hearing from folks.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank
I was so
you.
excited to talk because I just love music and I love how you weaved. I didn't even see the point of just helping people be discovered, like showing their talents on. I was just looking at kind of like the mental health aspect of it, but I love that you're creating a platform for musicians because I talk to different creatives that in different walks of life, and it's so hard to like really put a stamp in the world because it's just not a direct path at times. And so like you
Yes.
providing that is so amazing. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.